I've been enjoying dipping my toes into the world of professional wrestling lately, as I hope you guys have enjoyed the stories that I've been dumping into your slop troughs about the topic. Now, I don't want to start making videos on storylines and characters within the kayfabe universe of wrestling because I always keep it real. And to be honest, life is often stranger than fiction. And today's story is no exception. North Korea is a very isolationist state, and, at least in the last century, has held deep animosity for two countries in particular, Japan and the United States. North Korea hates all of the showmanship, larger-than-life attitude, and Western decadence that makes pro wrestling so great. So, you would think that a place like North Korea would have absolutely nothing to do with wrestling. And you would be wrong. Because desperate times call for desperate measures, and when your immortal leader is abruptly thrust towards mortality and the weight of the world is on your shoulders, sometimes you need to rip a page out of the Muppets playbook and put on the biggest show ever to save everything that you love. This is the story of how North Korea hosted New Japan Pro Wrestling and the WCW to put on a massive show in one of the most authoritarian countries on earth. And it turned into one of the most ridiculous stories that I've ever heard. The collision in Korea. So, you didn't prepare properly and you missed your chance at a beach body. Sucks to suck. But the good news is that summer is now over, so you have the perfect chance to lock in and get ready for next year. And here to help you blast the video game trailer music that you need to stay motivated is today's sponsor, Raycon. The essential open earbuds are a godsend for the gym. They are really lightweight, so I won't have any bulk throwing me off while I'm in the zone, and this nifty multi-angular hook ensures a secure fit for any ears, so my Raycons stay nice and snug while I'm working out. And their open ear design means that I can stay aware of my surroundings while I'm listening to my tunes, meaning that I won't accidentally get too loud when I shout, "Ooh baby," at the end of my set. Trust me boys, it really works, but while my ears are open, the sound is still crisp, as Raycon's premium quality remains unchanged, while still at half the price of other audio brands. And if that's not good enough, all of the other features that you know and love are still there. 36-hour battery life with 8 hours of juice in the earbuds themselves, check. Multi-point connection, check. Snazzy colour options, check. So, if you want a set of these bad boys or you fancy a browse of Raycon's other snazzy wares, then click the link in the description box down below or go to buyraycon.com/dankulaopen to get 20% off site-wide. And, as if the deal couldn't get any better, Raycon also comes with a 30-day happiness guarantee. Meet Antonio Inoki. And no, you're not looking at a spitting image puppet, his chin really is just like that. Possibly the biggest gigachad to ever walk the earth. I'm not going to go through his entire life story because this isn't a Mad Lad video, although Inoki probably should get one. So I'm just going to list off a few of his accomplishments so that we can get on with the actual topic. Born in Yokohama, Japan, Inoki very quickly showed a natural athletic talent, as he shot up to the height of 5'11" by the age of 12, eventually growing in his adult life to 6'3". He started basketball because, obviously. But then he quit to focus on track and field sports. At the age of 14, his family emigrated to Brazil, where he went on to win regional championships in javelin, discus, and the shot put, going on to the All-Brazilian Championships to win shot put and discus. Inoki then met Rikidozan, known as the father of Puroresu, or Japanese pro wrestling, in Brazil. And then he moved back to Japan at the age of 17 with him to train in the art of pro wrestling. And with his muscles cast in iron and his chin literally made of fucking granite, he very quickly saw great success in the field. I'm not going to list all of his titles and records in wrestling because this would just turn into a Mad Lad video. But I'll just say that calling him the Japanese Hulk Hogan would be a massive disservice to Inoki. He went on to found what is still the biggest pro wrestling outfit in Japan today. New Japan Pro Wrestling, or New Japan for short. In 1989, while semi-retired from pro wrestling, very heavy emphasis on the semi, Inoki was actually elected to Japan's House of Councillors, which is very similar in function to the US Senate, running as a candidate for a party that he founded, the Sports and Peace Party. His most notable achievement in this particular political run was his one-man trip to Iraq to negotiate the release of 41 Japanese nationals who were being held hostage in anticipation of the Gulf War. During this trip, Inoki converted to Shia Islam, although later in life he did kinda drop it a little. And then he came up with an idea to help with negotiating the release of the hostages. Inoki was going to put on a wrestling show in Iraq to try to win over Saddam Hussein. And it fucking worked. It fucking worked. Inoki actually managed to use pro wrestling to convince Saddam fucking Hussein to release all of the Japanese hostages. And then Saddam Hussein then decided to free every other foreign national hostage that he had. Inoki managed to free political prisoners with wrestling. The Gulf War then began in earnest just 6 weeks later, so it's very fair to say that by sheer gutsiness and showmanship, Inoki saved countless innocent civilians from being taken around the back of the kebab shop and told to think about the rabbits. This led to Inoki's re-election in 1992. But in the lead-up to the 1995 elections, he was in a much rougher spot, being racked with scandals and alleged connections with the Yakuza. Basically, especially during this period of history, if you were involved in any kind of fighting sport, the Yakuza would somehow always get involved with you, whether you wanted them to or not. So this wasn't exactly a very good look. So Inoki came up with an idea. What if he got himself back into political good graces by improving relations with North Korea? So how would he accomplish this? Well, there was only one thing that he knew how to do that did have a pretty good track record of improving international politics. Putting on a wrestling show. But not just any wrestling show. A cross-promotion extravaganza involving American wrestlers from the WCW ran by Eric Bischoff. Eric took to the idea very quickly, thinking that the ratings boost from a big international event like this would be just the ratings bump that he needed to finally overtake the perfidious Mr. McMahon and his evil World Wildlife Fund. Convincing the Americans is the easy part though. Americans will do anything for a cheeseburger and a Bud Light. Surely the hurdle, or more of a pole vault really, that Inoki would have to clear would be getting North fucking Korea to actually host the event. This, however, is where Inoki used his trademark main character energy to pull an inroad with North Korea out of thin air. Rikidozan, the father of Japanese pro wrestling and Inoki's mentor, was actually from North Korea by birth. Although, at the time, it was the Japan-occupied protectorate of Korea. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into the history of that, but you all know how the Japanese acted in foreign countries during this period of history, which explains why Koreans, North and South, don't like Japan very much. But the North Koreans did love Ricky Dozan. Ricky Dozan featured very heavily in North Korean propaganda, as matches with him defeating Americans in wrestling matches were repackaged and sold to the public as the mighty North Korean defeating the cowardly American in righteous and honourable combat. Now, Ricky Dozan's protege was asking to come home to fight the Americans on Korean soil. Now that's something that Big Kim can get behind. Additionally, Kim Il-sung had ascended just 10 months before the date that the event was planned to take place. So, Kim Jong-il thought that this would be a good way to establish his position to the larger world as the new supreme leader of true Korea, as well as show off the might of his nation, with musical, gymnastic, dance and military spectacles that showed best Korea as the powerhouse that it likes to LARP as. Listen, say what you will about communist countries and totalitarian dictatorships, but they know how to put on a fucking show. The opening ceremonies for this wrestling event puts Olympic opening ceremonies to absolute shame. In deciding which wrestlers to send for the event, Eric Bischoff went for a true all-star team. The only star missing from the sky was one Hulk Hogan. And Eric did offer him a match versus Inoki, which was very swiftly met with a "that doesn't work for me, brother." The reasons I have for Hulk Hogan declining this match are threefold and also entirely speculation. 1. Leftover resentment between Hulk and Kim Jong-il from their epic rap battle. 2. Since this was an event held in North Korea, the North Korean affiliated wrestler would have to win, meaning that Inoki would have to pin the Hulkster. Unacceptable. And 3. North Korea already hates America. But if Hulk Hogan, the embodiment of American attitude, was to walk out there flag waving and real America-ing all over the place, I think the very least we could expect is Hulk Hogan getting strung up like a mixture between a Money in the Bank briefcase and Mussolini. Or possibly instant World War III. However, the world almost got Hulk Hogan versus Antonio Inoki in North Korea. And we didn't get that. Because apparently, we can't just fucking have nice things, I guess. Still, Bischoff managed to get a good roster together, including Road Warrior Hawk, Scott Norton, Rick and Scott Steiner, the latter of which you may remember from Numbers, and a young upstart going by the persona of Wild Pegasus, who we all know and have very mixed feelings about as Chris Benoit. That's right, Chris Benoit went to North Korea. And, using his connections, Bischoff even managed to get Muhammad Ali to attend this event as a special guest. To be fair, Inoki did have a run-in with Muhammad Ali a few years prior in an early experiment in MMA, with a boxing versus wrestling exhibition match, where the rules were so anti-wrestling that all Inoki could do was lie on his back and kick Ali's leg. And that's what he did for 15 rounds. It was a draw. And everybody absolutely fucking hated it. The match was so controversial that it's even referenced in Baki. All of that talent is appreciated, but none of them measure up to the Hulkster. So when Bischoff was picking who to send as an opponent for Inoki, he landed on the most obvious choice. A perpetual heel that even Americans like to see lose. The dirtiest player in the game. The styling, profiling, limousine riding, jet flying, kiss stealing, wheeling and dealing, son of a gun, the nature boy, Ric Flair. Woo! Speaking of Ric Flair, do you know that he was kidnapped as a baby? Yeah, he was actually part of the Georgia Tan infant trafficking scandal. He was kidnapped as a baby, stolen from his real parents who he ended up never meeting and never finding, and he was sold on the adoption black market to his oblivious adoptive parents. We actually discovered that while doing research for a Georgia Tan video. Even when we focus on something that isn't wrestling, wrestling just figures out a way to sneak back in. But that's a whole other video for a whole other time. Anyway, with the roster filled and the dates decided, April 28th to 29th, it was time for our plucky band of WCW talent to board a North Korean military plane and make their way to Pyongyang. The plane was bugged to fuck, by the way. Completely covered in hidden microphones. And it was impressed on everyone on the plane that from the second they stepped off the runway until the second they landed back in the good old US of A, not to breathe a single word against the North Korean regime or be even slightly critical of North Korea. Being very familiar with kayfabe, the wrestlers handled this pretty well. Upon arriving in North Korea, each outsider had their passport taken away. Then they were paired up and each pair was given a North Korean handler. They were then led through an airport that was caked in dust and in serious disrepair. Workers were actually turning on the lights as they made their way through the building, and half of the lights didn't even work. To be fair, international tourism has never really been the glorious Republic's strong suit. Our intrepid band of Western explorers were then given a very lovely tour of the place in the days leading up to the event. They visited statues and memorials of Kim Il-sung and Riki Dozan, laying flowers at their feet. And they were then informed of some very, very interesting history factoids, like how the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki never happened. And that North Korea had won World War II. Absolutely crazy. I can't believe that I was never taught that in school. Thank you, Best Korea, for enlightening me. But anyway, the North Korean press then followed the group around on their tours with cameras that would be considered antiques even by that day's standard. Their video camera had a fucking hand crank, for fuck's sake. Now, just like the famous Madison Square Garden curtain call, not all wrestlers are able to maintain kayfabe perfectly. And our lucky loser of the night is Scott Norton, who broke kayfabe over a woman moment. Scott was on the phone to his wife one night, after she'd been trying to reach him for 2 days and the North Korean authorities were refusing to connect her with him. And Scott's wife was convinced that Scott was having a little bit too much fun on the road, if you catch my drift. Coming down with a bad case of that yellow fever. Which, if you consider that as far as she's concerned, he is in Asia with Ric Flair. And he hasn't called her for 2 days. Okay, fair enough, that would be something to probably worry about. But she clearly didn't know what the situation was like in North Korea. And Scott Norton let her know as much when they were finally talking on the phone in his hotel room. In a bout of frustration at the accusations of cheating, Scott yelled down the phone at her, "You don't understand what kind of shithole we're in." And he hung up on her. Then, 30 seconds later, there was a pounding on his hotel room door. Oh dear. The phone lines, of course, were being monitored. Because North Korea. And Scott was escorted to an interrogation room by a gaggle of armed guards. And shortly after, a more high-ranking looking Korean officer came into the room and started talking with all the guards. This made Scott a little bit antsy, to say the least. And he kept repeating that he had just simply gotten into an argument with his wife, when the officer snapped around and said, "We don't argue with our women, and they don't argue with us." Maybe North Korea isn't so bad. The guard then went on to give Scott a very stern rundown about what he can, and more importantly, cannot say in their country. Finally, he was frog-marched back to his room and left alone, with a disconnected phone. Scott Norton later commented in an interview that he believed if he wasn't there in the company of Muhammad Ali and Antonio Inoki, that he would have just been shot then and there. But let's forget about the horrifying realities of a totalitarian communist state. We're here to talk about good old-fashioned wrestling. The event was held at the Mayday Stadium, and over the 2 days, the total attendance broke 315,000 wrestling fans, with 150,000 showing up on day 1 and 165,000 showing up on day 2, which is just fucking insane. For reference, the next highest attended wrestling event in history was WrestleMania 32, which drew 80,000 people. Less than half of what the Collision in Korea drew for just its second day. Scott Norton commented on this on his limousine ride to the stadium with Ric Flair. Observing the droves of people walking up the road towards the stadium, Norton said, "Rick, man, we're really drawing here, look at this." To which the driver very quickly informed him that it wasn't because the people were all excited to watch the wrestling. It's because attendance was compulsory and anyone that didn't go would be shot. So yeah, it was the most attended wrestling event of all time, but when that's only because the other option was death, I don't think it should count. The opening ceremonies, as expected, were a sight to behold, with the sheer coordination from not just the performers down in the arena, but also the spectators. Because the spectators were holding up coloured placards to create images of, among other things, North Korea launching nukes at America and Japan. Sonny Ono, a wrestling manager with WCW, later found out that the coordination of the crowd came from 6 months of planning and rehearsal. The crowd, the spectators, the fans apparently, had to rehearse watching wrestling for 6 months. But then the wrestling started, and the crowd went absolutely mild. Like nothing, no reaction fucking whatsoever, because the only professional wrestling that North Koreans had ever even seen was cut-up segments of Ricky Dozen matches, which were sold to them as a strong North Korean beating the absolute snot out of American pig dogs in true combat. They had no frame of reference whatsoever for what they were seeing. So, they responded to the matches with confusion or catatonic stares. This frustrated the wrestlers in the ring to no end, because wrestlers very often use crowd reactions to gauge how the performance is going and to play to what gets the loudest pops. But they were wrestling in front of the biggest crowd any of them had ever even seen, and they were getting less feedback than an indie show for about 30 people in a high school gymnasium. Road Warrior Hawk actually snapped at what he perceived to be an ungrateful crowd, stopping partway through his match to get up on the second rope and curse out the crowd. I'm honestly surprised that he didn't just get domed by a sniper for that particular antic. Though, I bet that would have got a reaction from the crowd. And the thing is, the matches were good. The matches were really, really good. Honestly, the wrestlers put on a hell of a show. I do have to give a particular shout out to a very good match between Too Cold Scorpio and Wild Pegasus Chris Benoit, which finished with Benoit getting the pin after executing a devastating flying headbutt. What a very high risk move, banging his head like that. I sure hope that doesn't affect him later in life. Funnily enough, speaking of Too Cold Scorpio and Chris Benoit, on this very same trip, Chris Benoit actually prevented a murder instead of doing one. Road Warrior Hawk and Scorpio got into a little bit of a scuffle prior to their Korean excursion, due to Hawk calling Scorpio a pussy when they were on their tour bus. They continued scuffling in North Korea, to the point where Scorpio decided that something drastic had to be done. Whilst Benoit and Scorpio were sharing a room, Scorpio pulled out a metal chopstick that he had stolen from the dinner table and began grinding it against the concrete windowsill. Benoit asked what Scorpio was up to, and Scorpio said that he was making a shiv. Benoit said what I think any of us would have said in such a situation, where he said, "What?" Scorpio then replied, "Yeah, I'm gonna stab that motherfucker. Benoit then talked Scorpio down, saying that he didn't actually want to kill him, and on top of that, if he killed Hawk in North Korea, then he would never leave the place. This calmed Scorpio down, and later on the beef was reconciled when Hawk actually apologised to Scorpio in an elevator for, quote, being cranky. Anyway, Benoit bullshit aside, there were a few matches that actually managed to get some reactions from the crowd. The match between Scott Norton and Shinya Hashimoto actually managed to garner some gasps because of the sheer size of the men. I mean, a bunch of malnourished 5'0" Asians who have never even seen a white man before in their life suddenly being exposed to a 6'2", 280 Goliath is bound to get some reaction. Another match that managed to get that good crowd heat was the women's tag match, especially Bull Nakano, with her hair dyed blue like Marge Simpson and styled not unlike Marge Simpson, and her wrestling gear exposing not only her knees, but her entire thighs. My God, call me Marge Simpson because I'm clutching at my pearls. No woman in North Korea would ever act like that. Japan is truly a land fraught with perversion. I mean, it is, but not because of wrestling. The last match to get big crowd reactions was the main event, Inoki versus Ric Flair. In wrestling terms, this was actually two legends facing each other for the first time, and should have been a big deal. But again, the North Koreans didn't know this. What they did see, however, was a man who could be described as America in a bottle. Blonde hair, blue eyes, flamboyant appearance. Matched up with the successor to Ricky Dozan, the great Korean hero who put these Westerners in their place, which was shoulders down on the mat. With that sentiment, this was finally something the Koreans could get behind. The crowd began booing for Ric Flair's successes and losing their minds cheering for Inoki's counterattacks. Finally, when Inoki pinned Ric Flair, the crowd erupted. Another huge W for Best Korea. Flair looked really nervous making his way to the ring. Normally shooting the shit and laughing in the haters' faces. But this time he looked very calm and reserved. Even small, making his way to the squared circle. So, when the match was over and seemed to be a hit, I'm sure he breathed a sigh of relief. After the event, North Korean officials came to Flair and asked him to read a statement that basically said, "Korea best, will elbow drop all you American pig dogs." But Flair politely declined, and instead he read a statement praising the beauty of North Korea and their beloved ex-leader Kim Il-sung, while omitting any shots made at America. So, the curtain closes and all of our heroes go home. So, did the show accomplish any of its goals? Well, as for Eric Bischoff and the WCW, when's the last time you went to a WCW show? Yeah, exactly. The devil works hard, but the McMahons work even harder. And are possibly even more evil. The pay-per-view of the event went out on August the 4th of that year, but failed to garner any real viewership, and it was widely considered a flop. You can actually find the collision in Korea on YouTube, and if you have watched it, you might be confused as to why I said that the crowd was quiet, because they seem to be cheering an awful lot in the video. Well, that's because the show was not live, and therefore things could be added in post. Like crowd noise. The cheers are all edited in. And WWE actually copied this when they were trying to make Roman Reigns cool before he was actually cool. So how about North Korea? Well, they certainly did a wrestling show. And then 9 years later, Team America came out in cinemas. North Korea was still a joke. One funny thing that good old Mr. Kim tried to do was airdrop leaflets over Seoul of Inoki beating up a bloody Ric Flair as propaganda. They used a screenshot from a wrestling video as propaganda. Even funnier, North Korea used Ric Flair as propaganda. As for Antonio Inoki, well, he still lost his re-election campaign. Apparently, wrestling is nothing compared to the might of the Yakuza. He would re-enter politics in 2013, getting re-elected, and making more and more trips to North Korea and encouraging a friendlier relationship with the country. He retired from politics in 2019. Then, finally, in 2022, he passed away at the age of 79. Which, for a pro wrestler, that's a really good run. He was mourned the world over in wrestling promotions with many a tribute and a 10-bell salute. The idea for this video actually started when my editor was watching an MJF interview where he claimed that AEW All in 2023 was the biggest wrestling event ever, which didn't quite feel right. We did a quick Google search to test the veracity of that claim and found the Collision in Korea. And we all had a very good laugh at the idea of a pro wrestling event in North Korea. Then we started doing a little bit of digging, and the more that we dug, the more we found out about how fucking insane the event itself actually was. And I just wanted to tell all of you about it. Which is pretty much the same reason why I make all of my videos. I find out about a cool person or find out some cool shit, and I think, oh, the boys will love this, and I just really want to tell all of you about it. Juvenile, I know, but hey, it's fun. Now, I know all of you want a Hulk Hogan Mad Lad, and maybe one day that is coming. But I will say this. Nothing he could ever have done tops the sheer absurdity of Ric Flair wooing his way into fighting Antonio Inoki in fucking North Korea.
Just thought I'd show you before it goes away.
Yo! Fucking hell!
You can see the
You didn't cup! You didn't cup
I
it!
did.
Holy shit, that was with a cup. Just before you go, I've got a live event coming up on Wednesday the 17th of September in London. We're basically doing a live panel show discussing Trump's campaign, his term, all the drama that's happened, the Epstein files, and we're going to be basically just discussing a lot of things about Trump, and it's going to be like a panel show, kind of like Have I Got News For You, but actually funny. And it's going to be me, it's going to be Lewis Schaefer, Alistair Williams, Nico DeSanto, and it's going to be taking place in London on Wednesday, the 17th of September. And you can buy tickets for it down below. These things are just an excuse for me to hang out with all of you and get very, very drunk. So, if you want to get tickets, you can buy them down below, and hopefully I'll see you there in London on Wednesday, the 17th of September.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube. Everybody should subscribe.